Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new meta prediction video. And of course, with Hartford coming up in a few days, I will be in attendance at Hartford. If anyone is looking to meet me, I will be at Hartford. Of course, Hartford's meta is going to be very unique because we are coming right off of Portland, and we know that Portland's top 8 was very interesting too, as we did see no Gardevoir in top 8, and the meta was a lot different than what we maybe would have expected. And the deck that won was the Arceus Giratina deck. So there's a lot to kind of talk about and digest going into the Hartford Regionals. And I'm excited to do my little meta breakdown and talk about some decks that may or may not be here for my meta prediction video. If y'all are excited for the video, leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. I think we just hit 5,000 subscribers recently, so I do want to thank everybody once again for 5K subs here on the second channel. I guess here's to getting 6K now, and then maybe one day 10K. The dream is real. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of the video, and let me know what you think of the decks going into Hartford and all that good stuff. So we'll start things off, of course, with what I think is the deck to beat right now in the format, and that is Turbo Lost Box. Now, Turbo Lost Box is basically the BDIF at the moment, in my opinion. It's the strongest deck, the one that has the most amount of, good matchups, has the most amount of matchup fixing, mainly with the Kyogre. I think the Kyogre is the best card in the Lost Box deck right now, whether or not you're playing the Turbo build or the Alex Shemansky Nick Moffitt build. Lost Box Kyogre is still very good right now. And the Kyogre is still one of those cards that, like, when you're playing against a Lost Zone deck, unless they're giving away, like, signs, like, they're playing more Recycler than normal, or they have an Echoing Horn, like, if you know that they are, like, Lost Zoning cards that kind of seem sus in a Kyogre deck, like the Pokestop, for example, is a big sign that they play Kyogre, that's when you know to expect the Kyogre. But a lot of the time, the Kyogre can be very hard to play against because you don't know if they played or not, and then it's like, by the time it's too late, they win the game, and then you got to go to game 2 with that knowledge. But yeah, no, I think Turbo Lost Box is the best deck right now. It's got the best matchup spread across the board. I think it's pretty good. There's no deck that, like, straight up just beats this deck. I think maybe, like, Rapid Strike, maybe, but, like, other than that, I think that there's really no deck that just flat out has a really good win rate against Turbo Lost Box. And the Kyogre, I think it's probably mandatory going into Hartford because, again, it just helps against Arceus and Lugia decks and Mew, which are all big out there. And it might help against Guardy, too. Now, that's not saying that Lost Box is completely dead. I do think that the Alex Shemansky build of this Lost Box deck is also pretty good. This is obviously a very different take on Lost Box with the Kyogre package. Instead of playing, a turbo build with Dragonite and Raikou, this is all single prizers. We have Kyogre, we have Galarian Moltres, we have Snorlax in the deck, and there's also still the Hawlucha, which a lot of Lost Zone decks right now are, like, not playing. Like, Turbo Lost Box doesn't play Hawlucha. But yeah, the Nick Moffitt Kyogre Moltres deck is definitely really strong in the format. I think this is still a very good deck. This one is still kind of hard to play, though, with how it works, but I do think that it's good. The Moltres is great right now. I mean, yes, Mew and Gardevoir are still very popular, and I like Moltres in general right now. I think it's a pretty good card in the format. It's a savior of the format, in fact, in my opinion. But yeah, no, I really do like the Nick Moffitt, Alex Shemansky Lost Zone deck. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did well with this type of deck in Hartford. This deck could have a deep run in Hartford again like it did in Portland. Wouldn't be surprised if it did. Next up, we have the Sableye Cramsard, another deck that a lot of people swear is the best way to play Lost Box, but just kind of gets outshined by Turbo Lost Box right now. But Sableye Cramsard is still decent. I think its obvious biggest Achilles heel is the amount of Lost City that is going around right now. There are a lot of decks that do play the Lost City, and that is a big issue for Charizard, but I do think that Sableye Cramsard is a fantastic deck still. It's still, like, the third best Lost Box deck, as you can see in my little, like, ranking here in this prediction video. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sableye Cramsard deck did well in the tourney. I don't know if it'll get top 8 again, because I don't know if the deck has, like, the best... I mean, I'm not saying it has a bad matchup against Turbo Lost Box, but its Turbo Lost Box matchup can be shaky, so I'm not sold on the deck yet over Turbo Lost Box, but Sableye Cramsard is still a good deck in the format, in my opinion, and can still easily get a deep run. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if a good player maybe, got top 16 with Sableye Cramsard. I don't know about top 8, though. Next up, we got to talk about Lugia. I think Reagan Retzloff's Lugia list is pretty perfect, to be honest. I think the Urshifu is maybe the ideal way to play Lugia now going forward, over playing the Duraludon Lugia build. But yeah, no, Reagan's list is really good. This deck is really powerful. Lugia, if it sets up turn 2 Archeops, turn 2, is really hard to beat. It's got a good matchup against Lost Box, and while the Kyogre does make it difficult for Lugia to keep up, I do think that Lugia has one of the best Lost Box matchups right now that also kind of just beats Gardevoir too. Like, if you're going to play a deck that has a fine matchup against both Lost Box and Gardevoir, I think I would probably pick Lugia, because Lugia just beats Gardevoir and Lost Box pretty convincingly, in my opinion. And I do think that Lugia is a great deck. I mean, Lugia will probably get top 8 again in Hartford. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw Lugia get top 8. Don't know if it'll win the tournament. We've seen that Lugia just hasn't been able to take down a tourney yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if Lugia got top 8. Probably going to maybe get top 4 at Hartford Regionals. I don't know if there's any new spice Lugia can adapt, in all honesty, because it just kind of seems like the list is maybe figured out by now, in my opinion. Just kind of changing around the energy counts maybe is the way to go with the Lugia deck. And then next up, we got Gardevoir. Now, Gardevoir did not get top 8 in Portland, and in my opinion, it also has a really bad matchup against Lost Zone decks, and I think that's the one issue with Gardevoir. Gardevoir is a very strong deck, and I think it beats every 2 and 3 price deck in the format, as long as, you know, you don't draw bad off of, like, path and stuff like that. For the most part, I think that Gardevoir should beat every 2 and 3 price deck, albeit maybe lose to Lugia sometimes, but for the most part, as long as you're not getting Judge Path into Oblivion, I think this deck just beats every single non-Lost Box deck in the game right now. The problem is Lost Box is too popular and too strong. I think Turbo Lost Box specifically just destroys Gardevoir. And I also think that Kyogre, you know, it's another thing is, like, yeah, they have Sableye, which is pretty bad for Gardevoir, but they also have, like, Kyogre, which is also really bad. But yeah, Gardevoir is just kind of falling off, in my opinion. I hate to say it's falling off, because I don't think that the deck is, like, bad at all. I think it's still, like, a top 5 deck in the format, but it's no longer, like, one of the best decks. I think it's definitely fallen off a little bit, because it just has such a weak matchup against Lost Box. And I think the Lost Box matchup being really hard is one of the things that makes this deck a lot weaker. Though, honestly, it's still a good play for Hartford. I wouldn't be surprised if this time we saw Guardy get top 8. I think a Guardy list can get top 8 as long as it's either beating the Lost Box matchups or just dodging the Lost Box matchups. Then I really think that Gardevoir can get top 8. I think we will see a Guardy in top 8. Wouldn't be surprised if a Guardy got top 8 in Hartford. I do think the deck is really good, and I think it farms a lot of the 2 and 3 price decks out there. Again, as long as you're just not, you know, if you're able to constantly get around the path blocks against, like, Arctina and Mew, I think the deck is really good. So, wouldn't be surprised if Guardy did well. Now, we got to talk about Guardy Mewtwo, another deck that seems to be decent right now. Obviously, we saw a few notable players do well with it in Portland, but Guardy Mewtwo continues to be in the shadow of just, like, the straight toward Gardevoir deck. But Guardy Mewtwo is still decent. Honestly, it does have a better matchup against Lost Box than the other Gardevoir deck does, because you just have the Mewtwo V-Union, which is really hard, and a lot of the Turbo Lost Box lists, as you saw, have cut the Drapion in favor of, like, Kyogre. But the Mewtwo can still struggle. I mean, Lost Box will still play Drapion. You know, there's still lists that play Drapion, and there's also still the Moltres build of Lost Box, which can still be a presence too. For Mewtwo, Moltres is still scary for Mewtwo, so Guardy Mewtwo is still, like, decent, though. It does have an okay time against Turbo Lost Box. The Raikou is kind of the only thing that kind of makes the matchup a little tricky, is you'll go Klefki and they'll just, like, build up Raikou. But yeah, no, Mewtwo in Guardy is still good, and I think Mewtwo Guardy is still a fine deck. Not the best way to play Guardy, but still fine. Might see a couple in, like, top 6, maybe one in top 16. And then we got to talk about Arctina, the deck that won Portland. Arctina is still in a fantastic spot, I think, but it's one of those decks that, like, there isn't really, like, a way to, like, a counter deck to it. Like, yeah, I do think this deck has a pretty sketchy matchup against Turbo Lost Box, and I think that it also struggles against, any deck with any Lost Box deck with Kyogre. But it's just one of those decks that, like, just kind of has, like, okay matchups against everything. Like, I think it beats Gardevoir. I think the presence of, like, Arceus, and maybe even if you're going to be playing the Flying Pikachu, has a fine time into, like, Lost Box. Like, it's still winnable, even though Lost Box gets still tough regardless. If they get, like, Turbo Dragonite on your Arceus V, you're screwed. Basically what I'm saying. Or if they have Kyogre and they're able to use it in the match, it's tough. But I think that Arctina is still a fine pick. I don't know if it can win Hartford, but I do think we might see one, like, maybe get top 8, maybe. I think at least an Arceus deck will get top 8. But Arctina is still fine right now. Still a good deck. I think Double Choice Belt is the way to go, though, going forward, because I think Cleansing Gloves, it's still good in the Guardy matchup, but I think the way you beat Guardy, in my opinion, is you just throw Arceus and Tinas at them, and you basically just Judge Path them and pray. I actually don't know if you need the Cleansing Gloves. I think Double Belt is mandatory, especially in the Arctina Mirror match, where you need the belt to get over the V-Guard energy. Next up, we got to talk about Mew. I think Mew's actually pretty good right now, too, obviously. Mew's fine. Mew keeps getting top 8 of these tournaments, so I would not be surprised if we saw Mew once again get top 8 in Hartford. I think the list from Hartford is pretty good. I think the Penny's really smart. Mew's just a very good Judge Path deck, and I also think that Mew boasts a pretty good matchup against Arceus decks specifically. I think that Mew has a fine matchup into most Arc decks, depending on whether or not you're able to like boss KO Arceus. That's the big thing. If you're going second against Mew and they can turn to boss your Arceus V, it feels really bad. But yeah, I think that Mew's pretty good right now in the meta. I think that's a fine play. I know a lot of people will probably just play Mew because they just play Mew all the time, and it's just kind of their comfort deck. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Mew once again get top 8. I don't know if it can win, but maybe top 8. I want to talk about Arcdura next. I got the 2 Arcdura lists. We got the Alex Szymanski build, and then we got the Nathan build here from Portland Regionals with the Duraludon Umbreon. I think that Arcdura has kind of been like evolving as time goes on. I mean, we saw the build from EYC using the Vulpix. Now Vulpix is kind of out of favor a little bit for, you don't need it because Gardevoir is kind of teching for it. And now we see that Umbreon VMAX might be the new home for Dura. And that's the thing, like, Arcdura seems like a deck that, like, you just play it and then you just put, like, another type in the deck to, like, counter another deck. Like, this deck plays Umbreon VMAX, which obviously is really good against Gardevoir and Mew. And you even get the ability to get built-in Gust, which is kind of cute. And then, obviously, the Dura with the Karen's Conviction is really smart. I think, honestly, Karen with Dura is going to be a staple going forward. I'm pretty sure that this is Lee Buizeless from Portland. He didn't play Karen at all. So, like, I think Arcdura with Karen is just kind of broken right now. I think if you're going to play Arcdura, you have to play a Karen because it's so good into most matchups that you need Dura to one-shot. Because this deck is all about, like, two-shotting stuff a lot of the time. Unless you're bossing stuff up and KOing them with Dura. For the most part, you're just 2K KOing stuff. I think Karen's mandatory. I would like to see the Umbreon Dura deck get adapted and do good again in Portland. It's a really cool deck that I quite like. And then, of course, we got the Arcdura deck that Alex Szymanski played. Honestly, Vulpix still isn't terrible. Like, not just because, like, Gardevoir techs for Vulpix doesn't mean that Vulpix is all of a sudden, like, unusable. It's still, like, actually not bad. It still puts Gardevoir in positions where they have to answer it. They have to find their tech. And if a Guardy list is not respecting Vulpix, which, despite Vulpix, kind of falling off, they might not be anymore, then there is a chance Vulpix kind of rises up and stonks. So, wouldn't be surprised if the Alex Szymanski Arcdura deck still had a deep run in Portland, or Hartford, sorry. I think the deck is still good. I think the deck probably needs the Karen's Conviction now, but I do think that this Arcdura deck is still just really good. I think Vulpix is still, like, a fine Pokemon right now to play into Guardy. Now, Goodra's obviously good, too. I mean, Goodra's a deck that nobody really cares about. Not that it's a bad deck. I mean, that nobody cares about it. That nobody, like, thinks about it when they go into a tournament. And, Goodra's one of those decks that, A, is hard to play against. It's one of those decks that people don't know how to beat it. I do think that a good Lost Box player can beat Goodra. It's the formula to beat Goodra's been figured out. But overall, Goodra is a very strong deck right now in the format. I think it's still a fine play to bring to Hartford. It's just a deck that can get you a day 2 if you just kind of hit the matchups that you need to hit and you just kind of do what you need to do. Because this is one of those decks that you just do what you do. That's like the most straightforward way to describe Goodra, is do what you need to do. I do like the Spirit Mask addition to the deck, though. I think it's actually kind of going to be the staple, because you kind of need a way to kind of beat Zacian, because Gardevoir is still difficult. Gardevoir does have the ability to just Zacian blow you up. Next up I want to talk about is the Miraidon decks. Now, Miraidon is in an odd spot. We got 2 different Miraidon decks. We got the Flaffy build, and we got the Regieleki build. So the Flaffy build is a little less... I guess a little less, like, turbo, if that makes any sense. It's not as, like, I guess, fast. It's also relying heavily on Flaffy, which obviously can be very, awkward to have him play against, like, Lost Box and stuff. But the Miraidon Flaffy Box deck getting top 8 is an evident sign that this could actually be the better way to play Miraidon. Regieleki, Miraidon isn't terrible either, though. The Regieleki build still has a lot of power. I mean, you're able to one-hit KO things a bit easier. This could be better in a meta with, Arctina being popular, because you're able to blow up the Tinas easily with Miraidon. You can win the prize trade fairly easily with the Regieleki build of Miraidon. I think Regieleki is just a very, still a strong card regardless. And then, of course, the Flaffy build is a little bit more tactical with all the techs. You got the Magnezone for the Lost Box matchup, and sometimes Guardy. You got Raichu. Raichu's still pretty sweet. That's one of the selling points I have with this deck, is Raichu is really good into, like, Goodra and stuff. And then you have the Raikou and then the Miraidon. So the Flaffy Box deck is still good in my opinion. I don't know. Personally, I would maybe still play Flaffy Box, because I do like the ability to just kind of fix the Lost Box matchup a little bit with Magnezone, whereas the Regieleki build doesn't really have a good game plan into Lost Box. I think the issue with the Regieleki build, too, is that it's going to have a worse time into Kyogre, because Regieleki VMAX, they can just win the game by not even knocking out any Pokemon, by literally just going Kyogre on 2 Regielekis. And the Turbo Regieleki Miraidon deck here doesn't play Judge at all. So the Kyogre deck easily beats this. All they have to do is just basically KO 2 Regielekis, and that's very easy to do. So I don't know if the Miraidon Regieleki deck is good going into Kyogre, but I do think Flaffy is a bit better going into Kyogre because you have the Magnezone. Though you could play the Regieleki deck with the Magnezone, and that might help you a little bit more against Lost Box. Next up is Rapid Strike, another deck that a lot of people were actually playing in Portland and were on, but the deck didn't really have the best like performance in day 2. Though I do think that Rapid Strike is still fine right now. If you want to have a deck that like you can feel comfortable playing against Lost Zone decks, I would probably play this deck. I'm not gonna play it myself. I don't think that Rapid Strike has the best matchup against Lugia. I do think you still have to play Drapion V-Star right now, because I think Lugia is just a hard matchup without it. And even then, like, the Drapion doesn't, like, give you an auto win against Lugia, but it just, like, it gives your Lugia matchup a little bit more breathing room, but it's not, like, a guaranteed win. But yeah, no, overall, Rapid Strike is definitely a very strong deck right now, still, in my opinion. It's not a bad deck. It's actually not bad going into the Arctina meta, because of how good Urshifu is against Arceus. I think maybe you have to try to adapt Cheryl into the deck somehow to, like, work around Giratina, but I think Rapid Strike is still, like, an okay play for Hartford. Wouldn't be surprised if a few decent players piloted it, because it does have, like, a decently comfortable Lost Zone matchup. Like, if I'm going to be playing a Lost Zone deck and my opponent's playing Rapid Strike, it's tough, man. It's tough. So I think if you want to play a deck that kind of has a decent matchup against Lost Box, it's probably an okay deck to play. It's probably the only deck, to be honest, that, like, has a good matchup against something like Turbo Lost Box. Now, Lost Tina is an odd deck. A lot of people say that it's good, and then some people say, nah, the deck's bad. And its performance obviously hasn't been stellar. I hyped it up at the start of the format, but my hype has kind of just dwindled with the deck. I think the deck is, it feels kind of mid overall, though it still is powerful, and it's not terrible into, you know, 2-prize decks, though. The problem is going to be that Lost Zone matchup. And even, like, Turbo Lost Box specifically can be a difficult matchup for Lost Tina. This is the highest placing Lost Tina list from Portland. Yeah, Lost Tina's okay right now. It's nothing crazy. Maybe we'll see one get top 8 eventually. I don't know if it can get top 8, especially in the Turbo Lost Box meta, but maybe it can get top 8 one day. But I would like to see Tina get top 8 one day. Next up is Palkia. So we're kind of getting to the rogue decks now, like the off-meta decks. The first one I want to mention was Palkia. This deck is getting a lot of attention and kind of bubbling under the radar right now and kind of rising in people's radar. It's a really cool deck, and Palkia is still not bad right now. Palkia can be a little awkward, though, into, like, Raikou and stuff, obviously, and Miraidon can be awkward. Even though, like, you can be Miraidon. If you just get the first 2-prize knockout, you should just beat Miraidon. You just go knockout, 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 3 Miraidons, because you're both doing the same thing. You're filling your bench up, doing subspace well. But yeah, Palkia is a deck that gets to play a lot of really cool tech cards. We've seen Articuno be a really cool thing you can play. Like, the Paralyzed Articuno is really good. Helps you against Lugia. And then you got the Starmie V, which is also pretty strong right now in the format. Starmie V can be really good into Arceus decks, so I do like Palkia a lot. I think it's a cool archetype. I want to see a Palkia deck have a good run in Hartford. Not sure it's a top 8er, but I would like to see Palkia have a good run in Hartford. Next up is going to be Darkrai. Now, this list has actually got top 8, day 2, sorry. This list got top day 2 in Portland Regionals. That's really, really cool to see. Darkrai is a deck that seems like it's one of those, like, meme decks that I'm not sure how good Darkrai really is. It's a cool deck that can beat, like, 2-prizers and probably has a fine time in a Gardevoir. But I think the thing that holds the deck back is, does it even have a way to beat Lost Box? Or is Lost Box even beatable? Yes, this deck plays 1 Roxanne. This deck plays 4 Draw Supporters. Plays 4 Research and a Roxanne, basically. But the question will be is, will this deck ever realistically beat Lost Box? And that's going to be the thing that will dictate whether or not a Darkrai deck can have a good run in a tournament. I don't know if Darkrai can beat Lost Box. Maybe the Roxanne Palpad package will help a little bit, but Darkrai is a really cool deck to have in the format. I would like to see someone do well with it. Not sure it's going to do well. It doesn't seem like it's fit right now, but it is cool to see Darkrai. If only Lost Box didn't exist, this could probably be a legit archetype in the game. Lost Box, I think, kind of, unfortunately, gatekeeps this deck, which is very sad. Next up, we got Kyurem. Kyurem deck did get day 2, and I wanted to mention it here briefly. Kyurem's obviously, like, it's one of those memes that, like, is a meme, but then people realize that the deck's actually better than a lot of people give it credit for. And this list that got day 2 in Portland is really cool. It's got Starmie in the deck. It's got a Luxray in the deck, the Luxray that you start with, which is cool. The deck doesn't play Kyogre, so the spell's a lot more teched out. We see there's a ton of trainers. Actually, only 22 energy, which is still a ton of energy, but that's, like, not as much as you would think. There's a lot of trainers in the deck. We got Melanie, we got Serena, we got Irida, Discovery, we got a Candace. We got Clara, Switching Cup in the deck to put energy on top of the deck for Kyurem, which is honestly a pretty good trade-off. Like, if you're going to play less energy, playing a couple Switching Cups isn't terrible either. I do like this Kyurem list a bit. It's kind of sick. I mean, Kyurem isn't a deck that can probably win or get top 8 in a tournament, but having a day 2 run wouldn't surprise me. There's a good chance a Kyurem can get day 2. I'm not surprised to see it get day 2, and I would like to see Kyurem get day 2 again, if possible. Next up is Regidrago. This is actually from the Philippines. It was a tournament in the Philippines recently, and this deck actually did do decently well in the tournament. I think it got top 16, so this, like, Turbo Leafeon Regidrago deck did well, and it's really cool to see Regidrago do well. I'm a believer in Regidrago. Now, Regidrago Arceus is a deck that people have been experimenting with as, like, another, like, Judge Path Arceus deck, but I do like this, like, Turbo Regidrago deck a lot. I think Regidrago is a really, really cool card that it might kind of be in the shadow of, like, the other Dragon V-Stars, to be honest. Funny enough, because it's supposed to use the Dragon V-Stars, but it's kind of just in the shadow of them, which is, I don't know how that works out, but it just kind of does work out that way, unfortunately. But I would like to see Regidrago do well in a tournament eventually. You know what? I'm just going to say I want Regidrago to do well in a tournament, and I want it to get day 2 in Hartford. Then we got 2 Dialga decks. Now, this deck, Dialga deck, did well in the Philippines tournament I just mentioned, where the Regidrago deck came from. And it was the Magnezone Dialga deck. So there's 2 different Dialga decks right now that did well in 2 different tournaments. One in the Philippines. Now, Dialga is still a deck that still probably, like, crumbles pretty hard to, Judge decks. It's not bad into Lost Box, like, because of the power of, like, Star Chronos and, like, speed, this deck actually isn't bad into Lost Box. Actually, Dialga should be able to beat mostly everything if it doesn't, like, brick. Like, if the deck sets up what it needs to do, the deck should be able to just run everything over. Like, even Lost Box will still probably have a hard time in a Dialga. And then we got the Lost Zone Dialga deck here. This is a deck that got day 2 in Hartford or Portland. Very interesting archetype, because Lost Dialga is a deck that I think not a lot of people really would have expected to see again, because it lost Metal Saucer, which was a decent loss. And I was, you know, debating playing this deck for Charlotte, because I thought Lost Dialga was a really cool idea, but I wasn't comfortable on it. But it is cool to see Lost Zone Dialga do well in our post-rotation format when there's no Metal Saucer. But I guess the ability to build up Dialga with Mirage Gate is just that good. So, interesting list. You do get to play the Zam. Actually opting to play the Greninja instead of, like, a Sableye, which I feel like Dialga would still maybe play Sableye, to be honest. It would help a bit more against Guardy over playing Greninja, but I do like this deck a lot. I think this Lost Dialga deck is pretty sick, and I don't know, maybe it can get adapted going into Hartford. But yeah, those are my meta predictions. Again, I think Lost Box, like, the Kyogre build is just the best way to play it right now, and wouldn't be surprised if this maybe took down the tournament, though I can see an Arceus pile deck winning again. I wouldn't be surprised if an Arceus deck won. Not sure if Arctina can win again, or Arcadura, which can be adapted, can win again, but wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. Gardevoir will probably get top 8 again, too, despite I think Gardevoir might be falling off a little bit. But that'll be it for me on today's meta video for the Hartford Regionals. I will be attending, so hope to see some of y'all there, and I'll catch you on another video. Bye-bye.